So, a reminder of what we discussed this morning. So we had a poll before anyone had said anything to you, just kind of what you came in with your own preconceptions. Improving how we measure audiences was the #1 priority by far, not closely followed by changing the way audio is traded, and then also not much love for increasing brand safety, making audio more sustainable, or making the audio industry more diverse and inclusive. So what we're going to do, try and think of everything you've heard today, all the convincing arguments, all the fun facts and figures you've heard. Has your opinion been changed at all by what you've heard? I'm going to ask you to vote again. And we're going to see, could be that measurement is still #1, but we want to see, has it changed at all? Or maybe someone's convinced you that brand safety is actually more important than you thought. And what we're going to do, we're going to reveal the results at the end after you've heard from our illustrious panel, who are going to nudge you one way or the other. Maybe, maybe not. We'll see. Okay, so without further ado, I'm going to ask you all on the panel to make your pitch for what's the most important thing this industry needs to do to get more audio on advertisers' media plans. Don't vote straight away. Wait until you've heard it. Can you change your vote? Not sure you can, but if you can, feel free to. To my immediate right, Ollie Chadwick from Adswizz. Explain very briefly what you do, and then what's your pitch?
Yeah, I'm the regional director for Adswizz for UK and Ireland, so I oversee the supply and demand parts of our business. We have an end-to-end suite of technology solutions which helps publishers and buyers actually monetize and buy digital audio. And when I talk about digital audio, I'm talking about non-linear digital audio, so streaming, web radio, podcasts, etc. What's the #1 action that would ignite it? I mean, I think it's sort of 83% is saying measurability, but actually coming from
be more specific.
From my perspective, actually, I think that what's key from the specific area within which I sit. It's around, I think, making buying of digital media, digital audio easier, simpler, curating it, making it better packaged up so that buyers can access that inventory at scale. I think that the concept of measurability kind of comes into that, but I think the overarching issue is we need to make it kind of simpler to buy. And I think that there are fundamental disconnects between the way that people buy audio versus the way they buy other media. And unfortunately, I think the way that other media is bought, I think leaks into the way that digital audio is bought. So I think that there needs to be kind of an appreciation from the buyers and communication from the sellers as to how audio should be bought. And I'm sure we'll sort of dig into the whys and wherefores of programmatic, etc., and targeting maybe later on.
That's interesting. So actually, from what I'm reading from you, actually, you're more of a fan for kind of changing the way audio is traded.
Yeah, I don't know necessarily about trade. Bought, yeah. Sold, targeted. Actually, yeah, because I come from, I'm wearing a programmatic hat at the moment, so that would be my, that's a priority for me, because I think that, there are many other things as well, actually. And there's also that difference between, the types of audio as well. We've got DAB and we've got digital audio, and they're two very kind of different things. And I think that oftentimes we come against, when selling programmatic audio, we come up against buyers who say it's too expensive because they're used to buying linear audio at a much lower CPM, and there is a very big difference between digital audio and both of them serve a fantastic, fantastic role in the delivery of audio on campaigns. But I think the two kind of get conflated when actually they should be bought separately. That's a very long-winded and non-specific answer to your question.
I love that. Love that. I'm going to hop around and I'm going to be non-linear. I'm going to come to Michelle next. Michelle Sarpong from the 7 Stars. So your role is interesting. Head of Display, Audio and Out of Home. So there's a lot to unpack in that job title.
Yes.
But firstly, why are you across all of those as opposed to? Why do you structure it like that?
It's quite interesting because actually I think Ollie kind of touched upon it. I think it is quite interesting how digital runs through all channels now. So actually trying to keep it as siloed channels, that's one of the things that we did at 7 Stars, is to bring all of those channels together to then try and trade it in a better way. So, you know, there's always that age-old where does the digital audio budget sit? The same thing that connected TV problem they had in terms of where does that budget sit? What kind of narrative do we tell clients to kind of get them on plan? So with kind of the role and the kind of the team at the 7 Stars, we're trying to make that conversation a lot easier and actually be looking at focusing on audiences rather than the actual platform. So I think with the creation of this kind of role, it kind of shows the importance of like, actually, it's true, we need to figure out how, you know, audio is traded, but we as well, we need to make the changes our side as well. And that's from an agency point of view, a client point of view, and, you know, a supply point of view as well.
So is that your pitch? Do you agree with Ollie?
I do agree, I do agree, but I'm going to segue a little bit as well and say that I think there needs to be kind of an education piece. I think that one of the biggest problems is the fact that people look at audio as just linear. I think Rak will come on to this in a minute, but you can buy so many formats on some of these platforms as well. So you can buy video, you can buy display, so there's so much opportunity. And then leading on to that, creativity as well. There's so much creativity in the audio space with like podcasts, and I think obviously in terms of targeting as well. I think there's just so much you can do in that space. So I think that's what we need to do, kind of educate everyone in terms of what is available to then get it more on plans. I think we saw in the kind of pandemic how much creative is becoming more the forefront of the conversation with, like, you know, a lot of media campaigns, etc. And I think audio is kind of leading that space as well.
Okay, and you segued into Rak. Thank you very much. Rak Patel, who's head of sales EMEA for Spotify. So you're head of sales at EMEA, fairly self-explanatory. Great. Had fun interviewing your boss earlier today. Rak was desperate to get mentioned in Manchester United winning something. I don't know how to do that, so I just thought I'd mention it. So there you go. United are good now.
Arsenal top of the league, though.
Yeah, okay. So, Rak, what's your pitch? Convince the audience.
Two things. Firstly, thank you for your patience as we were changing the set up here. So that was slightly awkward as we were getting our seats. And Omar too is a Manchester United fan, so we're both quite delighted.
As the accent
shows. So at Spotify, the accent. At Spotify, we obsess about the consumer. We totally do. You heard from Lee earlier on, and that's where everything starts for us. So when you're thinking about the consumer and the consumer trend, you know, using a platform like Spotify, we are obsessed with personalization and ubiquity. That is very different to every other form of audio. So if you put us all together, that's dangerous. It is. So Michelle, I totally agree with you. What we believe from an advertiser perspective, from an advertiser or a marketer perspective, you should know that if you're spending money on our platform, whether that ad has been heard or whether that ad has been seen, full stop. And so the suite of tools that we're creating are to align to exactly that. So whether it's on the measurement side, Steve earlier on mentioned streaming ad insertion, which Omar, you're very aware of. That's based on streaming. So we can give the reporting back to an advertiser and to an agency. If it's on the side of scale, which is also massively important, we recently launched the Spotify Audience Network, which is both on and off our platform. So suddenly on podcasts, a marketer can reach a specific audience. Show-based is important as well. We recognise that. But if you're going to scale this, and obviously today is all about how do we get this bigger? How do we get more investment going in? Creativity, we touched on creativity too as well. If you're in a personalised environment, then that creative needs to be personalised to you too as well. So again, these are tools that we're creating on that front. And then the final one, I would say, is very much centred around something I know that's going to be important to all of you. Look, if we're all going to be lumped into the same thing, then how does a pie grow? Think about, you know, every other form of, not just media, if you think of every other industry, how do industries really accelerate? They accelerate through innovation, they accelerate through breadth, they accelerate through getting bigger and better in that way. So if we lump us all together, I think that's not the right way to go. And so I would absolutely say, you know, tools like, whether it's measurement, whether it's tools around scalability, these are all key.
Okay.
Manchester United, go.
Well done. And last but certainly not least, we have Jackie Lyons, who's head of planning at Havas Media Group.
So
you're the planner. You're the smart one. Tell us. What? Convince the audience. What's the number one thing?
I think the issue is, or the number one thing is, I agree, it's education, but specifically to strategy and planning teams, because I see again and again when at the role for communications stage, I think there is, Ollie, I totally agree with you, a little bit of kind of a hang up on past successes of linear being efficient reach. And I think that's often far too prescribed as the key role for audio. And I think, like, obviously, there's been just such change around audio in the last 5 years. Like, I mean, insane opportunities. And whether it's an equity challenge and a brand perception challenge, or whether it's right down into something, you know, lower funnel, there are tactics, startups, new innovation across the breadth of audio. And I don't think strategy and planning teams are taking full advantage of that. And if it doesn't happen then, you get into campaign cycles when you have a short window to activate, and suddenly you're back doing a 30-second spot buy again, you know, and you miss the opportunity to do something either from a test and learn perspective or something braver creatively, potentially as well.
So what one thing would really change that?
Yeah, I think it's education pieces. So, for example, in Havas, we did an audio day back in November to literally get people who don't think about the weeds of audio, all the formats, to really bring them into the conversation. So I think more things like that help just to spread people's perspectives of what's possible and take it out of their day-to-day.
I agree. Can I sort of jump in? I don't think that we necessarily, as an industry, because it's almost like it's a little bit of an echo chamber because everybody's in the audio space. But in terms of trumpeting the medium, I don't think perhaps we do that as effectively as we could. Because if you think about, and you know, the pandemic wasn't brilliant, but it was brilliant for highlighting, you know, how people kind of consumed audio and people's relationships with audio. And I think that's continued because, you know, you had it, you know, I had the radio on, you know, all day, every day whilst I was working, and that's continued. You know, we have that on in the office, and when I work from home, I'm still doing that. But actually, as a medium, I think it's totally unique in as much as you can be doing pretty much anything, and you can still have audio accompanying you in terms of what you're doing. And that seems like a really, really basic thing, but I don't think it's something which people think enough about, because if you're watching a screen, you're not listening to audio. But if you're driving a car, working out, running with your family, with friends, you've got, ironically, no audio on here. But you know, if you're working, there is audio is always an accompaniment. It's ever present, and I don't think you can say that about you know, websites and videos and, you know, movies and what have you.
I'm somewhat getting confused now. Help me out, because a lot of what we've been talking about today is actually audio getting more personal, more digital, more lean in, to use the jargon. So your point's obviously well taken, but in terms of what marketers, the buy side, is expecting from audio nowadays in that digital environment, I mean, for example, programmatic. How are we going to improve programmatic buying, for example? You're advocating for changing trading, making trading better. What about programmatic?
Well, programmatic, I think programmatic is, and to the point I was making earlier on, though, this is more kind of highlighting how ever-present audio is, rather than saying, oh, it's not about people's individual relationship with audio, because I think the two can coexist. In terms of audio, though, in terms of programmatic, I think, again, we're not talking enough about the benefits of programmatic audio. I think Bria mentioned it earlier on in his initial call. It's almost like programmatic is thought of as a dirty word, and actually what we've got with audio is automation, not programmatic, because when audio is traded in an automated way, it's not an open auction buy, it's a PMP only, right? It's PG, it's PMPs, it's a one-to-one deal. It's actually, from a sustainability perspective as well, there are fewer servers used. It's you know, it supplies path optimization kind of opportunities as well. So actually, from an automation of audio perspective, is something which we don't talk enough about. Point one, but I think that, you know, point two is that those traditional metrics and signals which are used buying other digital media are applied perhaps too readily to audio. And you've got buyers going, oh, I'm not going to use programmatic or automated audio because I can't target audiences. No, you can't, because you can't get a listener ID, you can't get consent. So actually look at more contextual type signals, and I'm not talking about just contextual targeting and brand safety, but rather, you know, time of day and geolocation and points of interest and things like that. Because those sorts of things are all possible with automated digital audio.
Caught you nodding just now, Michelle. I mean, okay, let's ask the buyer. Is programmatic still seen as dirty, as Ollie puts it?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I'm going to go back to my original point of education, because I think the biggest thing about the programmatic buy is actually people don't really realise the scale as well. I think when they're buying, they're thinking, well, you know, this is my linear plan, digital audio might add on DAX or wherever it might be, or Spotify, but I don't think actually for a programmatic buy you can actually reach quite a vast amount of audience in kind of one route. Also, I guess the kind of capabilities in terms of targeting as well is one thing that people aren't au fait with, I guess, in terms of that cost. But actually, with, you know, the way the digital landscape is kind of moving, I think we're obviously getting to the point where, like, you know, going through the cookieless future, etc. So there's a bit of disarray in that. So obviously with the digital audio space coming in there in the programmatic world, I think there's a bit of nervousness around there. But I think once we do the education piece, like what Jackie was talking about in terms of like educating the you know, our clients as well as the buyers around the capabilities around, you know, digital audio and the programmatic buy as well, I think that will naturally lead to a more positive future for audio, like the link there.
I love it. We've gone straight to programmatic. Check you out, Omar.
I just recently learned what it means. I'm going to open it up to audience questions. So please, if you do have any questions for the panel or any comments, please do raise your hand. And what I'm going to do as well, I'm going to call on my colleagues at the Media Leader, because I know they've been kind of asking for views throughout the day, and maybe some will filter through now. For example, where's Ella? Where's Ella Sagar? Ella, do you have a question for the panel based on anything you've heard today?
Thanks for putting me on the spot. Yeah, I guess my question for the panel, a lot of what has been mentioned on a lot of panels is a kind of unified measurement, unified buying platform, and also like why is audio still kind of not the number one on a media plan?
Do you want me to go first?
There's a few questions there, isn't there?
There is. Look, like I said earlier on, you heard from Lee. You know, what's important for us is that we offer the full suite of measurement for any advertiser and for any agency that's on our platform. So, you know, on one side, we partner with all the big third-party measurement providers that are global, or some of these are local too as well. That's really key, because that's where a lot of advertisers are obviously leaning heavily into and have been doing so across all of their media buys for many a year. So that's critical, right? That's really important. And then on the other side, you know, we have a duty there to create our own first-party measurement suite as well. You know, we, like other platforms, will know our audience better than any other, and any media owner will always say that about their audience too as well. So creating that suite, that's first party. So Lee mentioned that we acquired 2 companies over the last 12 months. One was Chartable, which is for the publisher side. So that gives a publisher, the creator, the insights that they require in order for their business to operate in the right way. And then Podsights, that's the attribution piece. And I'd love a question on attribution as well. But that is really key for us. So, you know, measurement for us is right up there, something that we have to address.
Yeah, I think it gets trickier when you start comparing, say, Spotify and DAX and all the other, you know, massive amount of media owners in a growing market. That has become a challenge. It's hard to explain to clients, like frequency, wastage, and we still struggle to have a unified view of that. And that's going to be an ongoing conversation, I think, still.
You asked a question about kind of unified buying, and I think that's really, because we were talking earlier on about there's hundreds of thousands of podcasts, there's thousands of radio stations and blah blah blah, and actually buying that in a sort of an efficient kind of simplistic way is quite challenging. But you know, we see it in display and we see it in video, where actually you have, you know, people building curated marketplaces on platforms like, you know, like we have. So we have one for audio only, and we are having, you know, we are already having conversations and advanced discussions with partners about doing exactly the same thing in the audio space, because I think, you know, if you look at, you know, I suppose a parallel might be in the display and kind of video space, the Ozone project, for example. But I think, you know, I think that was more kind of publisher driven, and that's about kind of a cross-pollination of data, rather than, if we talked about the sort of the scarcity of data in the audio space, what we've got is, this is something that's been driven by buyers and by platforms rather than publishers, who are keen to aggregate and curate content in one platform to make actually buying easier. And the key one is scale, because You know, there's a ton of scale out there, but it's just in so many different pockets, present company accepted. But, you know, there's a hell of a lot of really, really brilliant scale which you can, and fantastic inventory which you can aggregate and buy in a really meaningful way across, you know, podcast and streaming.
Yeah, I was going to tackle your why is audio not number one on plans, because I thought that's quite interesting. I think with the pandemic, and I think someone mentioned it earlier in terms of how audio kind of was fast-tracked in terms of like the amount of tech that's been produced and how, and Ollie touched on it as well, in terms of like how many times where you can access audio. You can access it on so many platforms, so many times a day. I think we need time as media agencies, as clients, to catch up on that. There is so much that's been fast-tracked in that sphere. We always know that TV's always been quite number one on plans for a long time. Obviously, that's changing. Obviously, audio's got a vast array of scale. Obviously, they can tap into new audiences, etc. But I think we need time to catch up. And I think with the talks about audience measurement, that will help speed that up. But I think it's getting there. I definitely think it's getting there.
I think one other point is like creative agencies. I think that like obviously there's like a sexiness to creating like tons of TVCs and video ads, and even if audio is number 2 on the plan, like the scripting of the audio script comes second to AV all the time. And I think that's another education piece. Like again, the same point on like the massive breadth of opportunity through the whole audio category, and making sure creative agencies can take advantage of that. Because when it's cracked well, like some audio ads are absolutely amazing. But you can really tell when it's not like, you know, first on their list versus when it is.
I'm going to add to that, if you don't mind, actually, and answer, Ellie, your question just in terms of how we get to the top. So you're right on the education piece. It's consideration. Awareness is not our challenge. It's consideration. So I'm going to go interactive with all of you. Put your hand up if you are not in audio. If you do not work in audio, put your hand up. There's our challenge. We're preaching to the converted. Right? So, you know, the biggest thing here is the education piece. The biggest thing here is to go out there and really, you know, how we get to the top is when everyone in the advertising industry sees us at the top, right? So that, I think, the education piece falls into consideration, very much so. Go audio.
The one thing, does anyone else have any questions on that before I move on?
And by the way, that was just me to tell people. That stuck their hand up there.
Slightly
Well, that's probably even more, you know.
That's a good point.
We've not heard, in my view, enough on diversity and inclusion, making this industry more diverse. I want to tackle this from the area of content discovery. I mean, digital audio seems to be going the same way as other digital media, where it's a winner takes most ecosystem, where if you're already popular, you become even more popular because of algorithms and just the way it's just a lot of noise out there, and people will select based on what they know. So how are we going to make content discovery better in order to, we've been talking a lot about the long tail and monetizing that in a more efficient way, but if people aren't discovering a more diverse, broad scope of content, how do we do that? Wave your magic wand, Jackie. How?
I think, like for publishers, I think if there's creators on your platform, it's really important that creators that represent diverse backgrounds or you know, niche like audience topics are armed with loads of ammunition on how to deliver an organic approach, which does have a big impact on algorithms massively. Like back in the day, you know, YouTube were very good at this with their creators as well, and giving them like talks and lectures on how to like dial things up. So I think that's something that audio needs to embrace as well now. The other thing I think is, like, we hear from clients, like there is an increasing desire to have a broader representation in our media buys. So making sure that we can access that from an inventory perspective, so that inventory is flowing the right way into publishers that don't have the same scale as some of the big guys. Or sorry, creators, I should say, not publishers.
Does that come, Michelle, from a buying perspective, does that come up as a challenge, diversity in audio media?
I think because of, I mean, from Semstar's point of view, we're quite au fait in terms of, especially the podcast space, because I think they have nailed the kind of diversity and inclusion. I say nailed, no one has, sorry, apologies. But like I think they've taken probably bigger steps in that sphere, because I think in terms of the opportunities, in terms of like what we can access on different platforms, I think a lot of publishers do try to make sure that they are representing content across audience sections. So I do think in terms of the podcast sphere, there is, you know, diversity and inclusion from versus the linear kind of spot buys and in terms of your standard host that you get on certain platforms, etc. I think the podcast kind of spheres kind of moved that forward. So I do think that there has been significant steps in that arena in the podcast sphere.
I mean, on Spotify or SiriusXM, I mean, how do you have tools in place in order to stop the algorithms just funneling everyone towards the most popular content because it might suit you in the short term better?
Omar, come on. So look, there's two things here. I think firstly, you know, our platform, you know, we want the world's audio on our platform. So we have 5 million podcasts, we have 70 million tracks. So that is fully diverse. So any human on the planet, and we obviously have close to 500 million of them on our platform, can get the content that's right for them. So that's the first thing. Right? 33% of what is consumed on our platform comes from the algorithms, comes from, you know, the discovery on that front. Right? So discovery has always been at the heart of Spotify. All of you that are Spotify fans, and there's probably quite a few of you in this room, you know, you will be listening into your Discover Weekly or your Release Radar and all those sort of things, so that you discover other content which we know you're gonna like, and that's the algorithm side. In terms of tools, so there's two innovations that we have at the moment, which I'll share with all of you. One is called Discovery Mode. So Leeds also touched on, you know, what's really important for us is the creator. Of course it is. So what Discover Mode is that the creators and their teams can actually pull out, okay, these tracks are going to be important for me to get out to my audience, or this podcast is going to be important to this type of audience. And so that will really sort of get into, you know, our sort of algorithmic tracks and so on to ensure that the right consumer, the right fan is listening to that. And then the other, which we launched in the US and Canada literally earlier this week, and I love this because I'm a house fiend, for those of you who may know, and this is AI DJ. AI DJ is your accompaniment, right? So, you know, the world of AI is coming into audio as well, of course it is. And you know, that's something we're very, very excited about as we sort of go across the next few years or so. And what that will do is, you know, it'll take the art of discovery. We will know you as a fan in terms of, you know, what podcasts you listen to, what music you will need, what mood you are in, what mindset you are in, and then the AI DJ will be your accompaniment. They'll give you more detail. It's actually one of our employees called X, great name. He's based in LA, and so, you know, we've taken his voice, and then he is right now the AI DJ for anyone that goes onto that. It'll be coming to this market relatively soon, and will accompany you through your listener journey as well. And he'll go into detail about the creator. He'll go in detail about, you know, any information that's going to be relevant to, you know, to your creator that's important to you.
I think that the music streaming sites have historically done content recommendation quite well. You know, you listen to this, you like this, there's a curated radio station, things like that. I think, you know, podcasting is kind of restricted to really two main platforms, right? So, but we partner with Acast, for example, and Acast has this, you know, amazing, hundreds of thousands of podcasts, but actually, in terms of their sort of discoverability, that discoverability will be kind of limited to where the listener is consuming, which platform the listener is using to consume that podcast, right? So they can use, I guess, their own shows which sit within their network to kind of cross-promote podcasts within it, which is brilliant. But I think the challenge for the platforms through which those podcasts are consumed is to make sure that and I'm not suggesting you do this, of course.
I mean, this is a debate.
But to make sure that any podcast recommendation is kind of meritocratic, and it's based upon you're listening to this, so you'll like this, not you're listening to this, so here's a Spotify exclusive podcast, which we want you to listen to, which we'll monetize. And I'm not suggesting this happens. But
I mean, do you mind if we both just then? Okay.
But because streaming is so different, there's so much diversity of where people can consume music. We were, you know, Deezer and SoundCloud and, you know, multiple others. Podcasting is very different because it's Spotify or it's Apple.
Yeah. So thank you, Ollie. This has been touched on throughout the day, and I think it's a really important piece that I'd love to sort of reshare, actually, and that's the journey that podcast advertising is going on. You know, we feel responsible that we need to bring podcast advertising into the modern age. So think about digital video. Think about advertising in digital video, and go back 12, 13 years or so. Some of you may have been in the industry back 12 or 13 years ago, some of you may have not. And think back then about scale, about the commercial models, about the ad experience, about measurement, about that scale piece in terms of whether it shows, whether it, so on. And then fast forward back to now. And think about where digital video, from advertising perspective, is right now. And that is the journey that podcast advertising, as I know both Jackie and Michelle, who are brilliant partners, know that we are on right now. So what that means is that, yes, at one side of the spectrum, you have the big shows, you have the host reads, etc. But scale is key as well. If you've got 5 million podcasts, and of course brand safety becomes a really important piece in this too as well. And again, think about video. Think about all the players in the video space. Why video is where it's at right now is the scale, is the platforms that are in that space. And look at the size of video as well, right? So, yeah, all right, Ollie.
Didn't answer the question. Any questions on that before I move on? We have one over here.
It's not about that specifically. Hi, I'm Ali from Global. An area that hasn't come up much today is gaming, which
Gaming.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Ali from Global. An area that hasn't come up today is gaming, which is obviously a massive audience and has a big user base. What's your perception and also your clients' perception of in-game audio advertising?
I believe Domino's are about to sign up, so positive. I think like anything, audio is so big now, it's spreading its tentacles into every single possible channel. And you touched on it, Ollie, like we're big context people in Havas. So the fact that you can literally use data now to understand what someone's mindset is based on how they're listening to things is like literally music to our ears. I didn't even think of that as fun. Didn't even think of it before. But gaming is another like massive growth area, obviously, and something that I think, along with stuff like Say It Now, it's probably an innovation area within audio. And I think for clients like Domino's, it will go into their test and learn agenda for the year. And if it's working, it'll be on the plan from then on. But it's a no-brainer. I mean, pizza, gaming, like, you know what I mean? Audio, it's just perfect. So that's one example anyway.
I mean, it's very nascent in-game audio, and we partner with some of those entities, and I think that absolutely it's a fantastic medium with a huge level of engagement. I just think that it's going back to that sort of the early days of video as well, where it kind of became a little bit like the Wild West. And there was a lot of businesses that were kind of making a fast buck out of it by not having direct relationships with some of their producer partners. So I think all I would say is if people are looking at buying in-game audio, and you can access that through our platform, I would just say make sure that what you're doing is you're curating the inventory which you're buying. And you're buying through kind of reputable channels, because there is a ton of it out there.
Yeah.
But again, it's becoming more and more, I think, standardised, and there's an enormous amount of rigour which is applied when people look at working with when we're looking at onboarding in-game audio publishers. We're really stringent in the way that we vet them.
I was just going to say, I'm really interested to see where all of these things kind of play out, because, again, borrowing from video and thinking about something like attention, for example, which we know, like looking at podcasts, have extremely high attention, there's a degree of focus. I mean, I think it was someone from Spotify who made the joke of, have you ever tried to WhatsApp someone while you're listening to a podcast? You either have to redo the message or go back and listen to the podcast. You can't do the two things together. And there's a certain type of advertising that works in that context. Very much so, and you want to be driving brand recall and messages that are deeply embedded into people's minds. But it's quite different if someone's gaming. It's quite a different type of experience, and that might be more of so something like a Domino's and a call to action might work a little bit better in that environment. So I'm interested to see how all of these different opportunities over the next few months, when we start getting evidence back and what they actually deliver for clients.
I was just going to say that it's quite interesting with that, because you mentioned Spotify, because the research we've been shown says that a lot of gamers are listening to music when they're playing these games, and then the legitimate vendors will lower the volume level of the music when they play the audio ad within the game. So actually the two kind of have this sort of symbiotic relationship.
Yeah. Look, from our perspective, I mentioned ubiquity earlier on. So, so audio is ubiquitous, very much so. So we have 4,500 partners, whether that's devices, whether it's gaming consoles and so on, where the Spotify app will be. And so, you know, we absolutely recognise that in gaming, Spotify can play a massive role. For those of you that game or have children that game, you will know that you will be on Spotify at the same time too as well. So I think, you know, then that becomes very exciting for you two, right?
Yeah,
You know,
totally.
in terms of how you sort of plan around that for the brands, very much so.
Sonic branding opportunities as well. We've not talked a lot about Sonic branding. I thought like at last
But
year's
that's
conference,
a good
yeah.
example of my
Yeah.
first point about the education piece. It's a perfect example of it.
Yeah.
Like we have to move away from just spot buys as like the common thing, and even programmatic is amazing. And again, I'd be much more about moments than finding niche audience person. But there's just so many opportunities, and if those things can be hard to crack with clients, you need to explain them properly. You need a creative agency coming in and taking advantage of all of these things. So they have to happen outside of campaigns nearly, or certainly maybe in an annual plan or an annual framework to take advantage of.
I love that you mentioned creative agencies as well, because I think that is a really important point. So again, you know, and this is something we all have to do, but a priority for us is that sonic identity for brands, right? So, you know, earlier on, Jason did the whistle, I'm not going to whistle, and so on. But many, many brands are now thinking about that sonic identity, even if they've been radio players for many a year, because that suddenly creates such an engagement right here instantly as well. And so, you know, we're doing a lot of work with global brands, local brands, and so on to support them on that.
Great. We're nearing the end, so I'm going to reveal the results. If you haven't voted, please do so. Where's... There's the QR code if you want to...
Was that rigging? Is that what you're doing?
No.
No.
Right. So, but before we do that, one last chance. Sam Tidmarsh, based on what you've heard today, conversations you've had throughout the conference today, any questions for the panel, any insights that might swing the vote?
So I think the one thing that struck me, and by the way, when when we were writing this conference, the one thing that really, really struck me was that theme 2, for example, which was later in the morning, was always meant to be a theme about the mixing creativity and tech. And very, very quickly, it became all about measurement. When I spoke to Tom Marden at Tesco and Wendy Moores at Direct Line, I wanted to talk about things like brand safety. Very quickly, we started talking about measurement. So I think it gives firepower to the one we're probably about to see come first. One thing I do worry about is in 10, 20 years, whether we'll not be sat here thinking about the thing that was bottom on the list, which was our planet. And I think that's something we should all be concerned about.
Sam makes an excellent point. I mean, at the top, Ollie, you mentioned that you know, audio is sustainable, and kind of everyone nodded, take those facts. But you know, I mean, if audio is going to grow, it's going to be more digital. There's obviously electricity, carbon, etc. There must be a lot more this industry can do to become more sustainable.
I agree, and I didn't know an awful lot about sustainability until I knew that we were going to be talking about it today. So I kind of dug into it a lot, and actually, in terms of its green credentials, audio is just so much greener than, you know, other media channels. However, and if you look at those businesses that are innovating in this space, like Good Loop and the Good Net, where their focus seems to be is on video, because video is has a much higher carbon footprint. But the reality is, though, that what we should be doing, I think, as an industry, as an audio industry, is actually talking about the benefits of audio and its specific green credentials, almost as when we talk about, oh, it's an engagement medium, and it's, I won't talk about measurability, but I'll talk about, you know, programmatic audios, or, you know, you can measure it, whatever. But we should also be talking about all those things a lot, you know, at the same time we're talking about the credentials of audio as a green alternative. I'm not saying, oh, everyone needs to just, you know, start spending on audio because it doesn't leave any, you know, it's net zero. That's not the case. But, you know, it really is, you know, so much better for the environment than other sort of digital. I'm not surprised that sustainability is much lower, because I think perhaps people are aware of the fact that it's not as high as
but if the point of this debate is how should we market audio as a wonderful medium, then we would talk about Any
Yeah.
insights before we wrap up about
Yeah.
how we can become even better in terms of sustainability?
Yeah, I'll add a couple of things to that. So I think the first thing is, what do you do at home, right? So we, as a Swedish company, this is really important to us. We became carbon neutral in 2020. We want to be zero emission in the next decade.
How did you do that briefly?
So a whole raft of things, whether we looked at our production lines, we looked at our staffing, our teams, our offices, all elements of our operations, very much so. And again, look, this is something that is so important to some of us, the Swedes and that market. And it's always been a very progressive market around, whether it's things around life, whether it's things around sustainability, always has been. And I think that everyone could sort of recognise that. Then from an advertiser perspective, one of the teams in our organisation called Creative Collective created something we called Sustainable Sonics. Now what Sustainable Sonics does is actually offsets any form of carbon usage, and in fact it was O2. Absolutely, Jackie with O2, and then GIFGAF, and then NatWest as well. And so these were all campaigns that were offset pretty much over a sort of time period that we worked with you on as well. So I think there's different routes you can go to serve the right purpose. And the last thing I'll say, just on those 5 questions, each of them are important. Right now, there's a poll, so we had to pick one. So you didn't say that we could pick in order. All of them we have to address, and I think all of them, I know for our organisation, each one of them is very important.
Yeah. One thing I would say to challenge, because obviously audio is forever innovating. I think the challenge is to every kind of partner is, as you're innovating, put sustainability at the heart. I think we're quite a unique position at the moment in terms of the amount of how quickly it's innovating, whereas you've got the likes of publishers and TV stations that are trying to insert sustainability after the fact. So I think that's the challenge. I think audio has the position to potentially become one of the most sustainable medias, as long as it puts it at the heart when it's innovating.
Okay, I'm going to put you out of your misery, if misery is the right word. The results are...
That's not changed.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Not a huge change. I don't know why you all went ooh. So still, not by as much as before, but improving how we measure audiences is number 1. 7 out of 10 of you think so. But the way audio is traded, a bit more on that. Quite interesting. And diversity inclusion is up from before as well, which I think is good. Yeah, brand safety, sustainable, tick, tick. So fine. Thank you very much, and thank you to our panel. Thank you so much, and please stick around for the drink afterwards.